Chapter 29. Is your life what you want it to be? When you find an attractive long-term goal, it is easy to be induced to take on obligations that seem necessary to attain it. Unfortunately, however, years later the obligations may have turned into burdens, and the burdens can remain long after the goals have been reached or even discarded. For example, an individual gets married because he's in love and wants to enjoy love, affection, appreciation, and understanding for the rest of his life. A year or two later, the love has evaporated, but the structure that was erected to achieve the goals still stand. The negative side of marriage remains long after the positive goals have been discarded. In smaller ways, routines in your life can continue long after they have ceased to be valuable. It's easy to maintain pointless activities without reappraising their relevance to your current goals. So, it's important to periodically recheck your assumptions, reappraise your activities, and re-examine your goals to see how much relevance they still have to your happiness. One way to do that is to make a list of the things you do with each of the 168 hours in a typical week. Include every one of your routine activities, including eating and sleeping. Then apply labels to each of the activities to help you determine how much you're getting out of those hours. There are 4 kinds of labels you can use, each of which will help you appraise your life from a different perspective. 1. Good, bad labels. This set of labels will identify how much of your precious time is being used in ways that add to your happiness, and how much is being wasted. Use the 3 labels good, bad, and indifferent. Put the good label on anything that makes you feel good. Put the bad label on the things that cause you discomfort, the things you dread, the activities that seem to be prices to be paid, and apply the indifferent label to those things that seem to be neutral, whatever provides neither pleasure nor discomfort, brushing your teeth perhaps. Don't apply a label in accordance with what an activity ought to be. For example, don't automatically label an activity good just because it's supposed to be entertainment. Maybe you play poker with the boys because it's a habit. Or perhaps you go out to dinner every Sunday only because you've done that for years. Or maybe you play bridge with the Culbertsons on Wednesdays because you've never thought of anything better to do. Don't consider something enjoyable just because you don't know what you would do instead. You won't find anything better until you first establish that you're not satisfied with what you're doing now. On the other hand, the fact that you work 40 hours every week doesn't necessarily mean that it's unpleasant and must be labeled bad. There may be parts of it that you enjoy, and parts you don't. If so, separate the general category work into specific hours to be individually labeled. The indifferent label is mostly a catch-all for those things that seem to defy either a good or bad label. There are many activities that you wouldn't consider unpleasant, but which adds no enjoyment to your life. Going to the mailbox, eating breakfast, walking the dog, reading the newspaper, etc. As you look at items labeled bad, ask yourself, why am I continuing these activities? If you answer, because they're necessary, get tough with yourself and demand to know why they can't be eliminated. If it's a box that you're maintaining, find a price and pay your way out. And be impatient with the items labeled indifferent too. Some of them may indeed be necessary to stay alive, but a lot of them may just be ways of passing time while waiting for something to happen. Start daydreaming and exploring to find new activities that can make more exciting use of your time. It isn't necessary that your life be full of bad and indifferent activities. Take a close look at your present routine and rearrange things so that a great deal of your time is spent more enjoyably. 2. Positive, negative labels. Now, analyze the list of your weekly activities from a different perspective, using a different pair of labels. Label each activity either positive, those things you choose to do to increase your happiness, or negative, those things you do in order to avoid unhappiness. A positive label would be attached to a Sunday afternoon in which you have no commitments and can choose among several ways to enjoy yourself. A negative label should be applied to a Sunday afternoon you must spend with your relatives, if your motive is only to avoid recriminations and family turmoil. After you've applied labels to your entire week, you should have a pretty good idea how much of your life is yours to enjoy as you desire. If it isn't much, start dismantling the boxes that tie up so much of your time. 3. Active, passive labels. This approach is similar to the last one. It will help you to see if you are making things happen in your life, or if you're just going along with what others want. Label each activity active or passive. The active label applies to anything you have initiated, the things you do because you have decided they should be done. The passive label should be attached to those activities you do because someone else wants you to do them. Do you simply react as other people initiate things? Do you find yourself hoping that others will suggest the things you'd like to see happen? If so, why don't you act? Why don't you initialize new, more enjoyable, more sensible activities? After all, others may never initiate the things you want to happen. No one knows better than you what will make you happy. If you don't ask for what you want, you will probably never get it. And if the asking or initiating is certain to meet with rejection or problems among your current relationships, then ask elsewhere. As you apply these labels to your weekly activities, designate passive those things you do only to preserve a relationship, even if it's a relationship you value. Such things as conversations that bore you, favors, etc. As you look at the labels, you can see how much of your time is necessary to preserve the relationship, and that should tell you if the situation is as compatible as you thought it was. Look for relationships that don't require that you tolerate unpleasant things in order to maintain them. With the right people, you should be spending most, if not all, of your time doing things that please you, that make sense to you, the things you want to do. Compromises seem necessary only because of inappropriate situations. If you are involved with the right people, the word sacrifice shouldn't even be in your vocabulary. 4. Production enjoyment labels. Now analyze the list from one more perspective to determine why you've taken on these activities and to see if they still serve any valid functions. As you look at each activity, choose from 5 labels. The first is enjoyment, that which brings you happiness right now: golf, sex, reading, TV, travel, etc. The second label is past mistakes, anything you must do to pay for some costly thing you did in the past: alimony payments, child support, installment payments on something no longer useful, effort expended to undo a bad deed, etc. The last 3 labels designate activities that are supposed to promote happiness at some time in the future. They are assumed to be productive. The payoff may be expected soon, or it may be a long-term project, or it may be something you now realize will never come to fruition. The first of these 3 labels is productive. Short-term, which applies to anything you expect will produce happiness in the near future. It can include any part of your working time that yields money you can spend enjoyably right away. It can also apply to the time spent planning and preparing for a forthcoming activity that will give you pleasure, such as arranging a party, building a boat, or planting a garden. Productive, long-term labels should be attached to projects that you hope will produce happiness in the distant future. For example, you might be going to school to acquire a skill that will increase your income 2 or 3 years from now. It can also apply to the hours spent earning the mortgage payment that will give you a paid-for home many years from now, if having a paid home is important to you. And as you appraise your weekly routine, you may discover activities that offer no hope of gain. They are the things you might have once undertaken with a definite goal in mind that has since become irrelevant. Label those productive, never. And smile as you realize that you have just found a few hours each week that will soon be free to be used for something new and more rewarding. That can include a language you have been studying because of a job you have since changed, or a business that's been losing money and will continue to do so, or time expended for a community cause whose failure is obvious, or a marriage you had hoped would someday bring you love but hasn't. Some activities can bear more than one label. Your job might be productive of income to be spent, but it might also include the enjoyment of various projects and discoveries, not to mention the more obvious things like entertaining clients at expensive restaurants, coffee breaks with a cute secretary, or Rotary Club meetings, if you enjoy them. So break your work week into individual hours and apply the labels to each activity in your work. The 5 labels identify those parts of your life that deal with the past mistakes, the present, enjoyment, and the future, the 3 productive labels. You can't evade paying off the mistakes of the past, but you can look for ways to reduce the costs. And you can find ways to accelerate the payment so that you'll be free of them sooner. Neither can you disregard the future. It is important that you don't do things today that must be paid for with regret tomorrow. But at the same time, it's very easy to get into the habit of doing things that add nothing to your future, but which are vaguely justified as being necessary for the future. When I review my activities with this technique, I immediately eliminate the productive, never items from my life. I spend the most time appraising the productive short-term and long-term activities. I'm very skeptical about long-term projects. In an uncertain, changing world, it's too easy for them to become irrelevant by the time they're completed. I try to keep goals telescoped into the short term, where they can be appraised realistically and disregarded when they don't add to my happiness. I have found that the most fruitful long-term projects have evolved out of the short-term projects. The short-term projects have definite payoffs at various points along the way. I never have to wonder for very long if I'm doing the right thing. If they then lead naturally into larger long-term payoffs, so much the better. But I never have to undergo a long period of stoic self-denial based upon the hope of a brighter future many years away. I also take a second look at each activity I have labeled enjoyment, to be sure I really enjoy those things. If I'm not very sure, I start looking for better things with which to replace them. This technique should raise important questions for you as you appraise the motivations behind each of your activities. The goal is happiness, but it's easy to be sidetracked into worthless activities by vague promises of better days to come. Every day should include genuine enjoyment. The many stories of single-minded success seekers who patiently climb to the top make good reading, but they can overlook a lot of relevant details. Often, the prize is attained when the winner is too old to enjoy it fully. In reality, I think that success is more often achieved by individuals who found ways of enjoying themselves while in the process of getting where they wanted to go. Labels. If you use these 4 techniques, you might wind up with a page full of labels. It may seem very mechanical, but it will help to demonstrate how much of your life can be wasted in purposeless activity. If you wonder why you aren't free, a few hours spent with these techniques may provide the answer. Each of the 4 techniques can be utilized within subdivisions of your life, such as your work. By reviewing each hour of your typical work week, you can determine how much of your time is spent in ways of your choosing, how much is actually contributing to your income, how much you enjoy your work, and how much you're controlling your own career future. If you manage your own working time, the labels can inspire you to make changes that will increase the productivity and enjoyment in your work. If you don't manage your working time, the labels can tell you whether or not your work is valuable to you. If your job is one in which you're just there for 40 hours each week to do whatever you're told, don't waste too much time with these techniques. Use the time to look for another job. I've never been much for taking notes and writing things down, so I can understand if you think that making a list of your activities is too much work. If that's the case, you can still use the technique by mentally labeling each thing as you do it. After a day or two, it might become habitual to identify each activity and evaluate it. I'd still like to urge you to write out the list, however. Only in that way can you see at a glance your total situation and make a realistic appraisal of your activities. The use of these techniques can dramatically increase your self-control, self-confidence, and happiness. They will provide an answer to the important question, how many hours a week are you happy? It's very easy to pay more attention to the lives of others, to complain about the state of the world and the mistakes of others, and to ignore one's own self-defeating habits. Without realizing it, you can spend most of your life doing things that contribute nothing to your happiness, and that actually perpetuate the conditions that make you unfree and unhappy. Don't be too anxious to justify your activities as being necessary to long-term goals. The future has an annoying habit of forgetting its appointments or arriving too late for them. I have always found it hard to understand why so many people live so much for the future, especially when the present is such a lovely place. Simplicity. The primary value of these techniques is to simplify your life, to help you get rid of the vague, complicated activities that contribute nothing positive. Arrange your life so that you don't have to spend every waking hour carrying out obligations, holding things together, trying not to rock the boat. Make sure that every week has a specified time that's totally unplanned. Reserve that time so that you can decide, when it arrives, how you will use it. Don't use it to catch up on unfinished business. Use it to enjoy yourself, to do what you want most to do at that moment. When you have accomplished that, arrange things so that every day has such a period of unplanned time. Make your life meaningful and tasty by enjoying happiness every day. You will have to make some long-term plans, of course, but periodically reappraise your routine to be sure those plans are still leading you towards rewarding goals. I have been told so many times that freedom is just a fantasy, that you can't live that way in the real world, that there are too many daily commitments that have to be met, that in real life, things are much too complicated to be able to do what you want and to enjoy yourself. But who made your life complicated? You did, of course. It wasn't society, the economic system, the people you consider to be nuisances, your parents, or anyone else. Every complication in your life today is the result of something you've allowed to happen. You initiate it, or you consented to it, or you have allowed it to continue. You are where you are today because you have chosen to be there, and you can choose not to be there. You will have to pay for past mistakes, but no mistake warrants a life sentence. You can telescope those payments into the short term and get rid of them quickly. You can get rid of bad relationships, meaningless obligations, and negative commitments. You can do anything you want. You're free. If only You're free. If only you will realize it. Only you can choose to make things better for yourself. You can decide to stop going along with things that are handed to you. You can decide to live your life as the free person you are. Don't tell me that it can't be done. There are too many people who have already done it. No matter where you are now, you can unravel all the knots that you've woven into your life. You can decide to be free. No one else has to be convinced. It requires only your decision and action.